Okay, just want to go over this quickly. Hopefully this will be a blessing and a help in some way. So we have to have an understanding of as life function and moves through, we have different spaces, and as we have those different spaces, our lives become compartmentalized. As we take a family, for instance, we have a family that begins to grow up together and work together and live together, and then we become adults. And as we become adults, those spaces begin to take on new identities and new spaces, and the family begins to expand and move through. And if you can imagine, this pyramid would begin to spread out. So many times, as the case is, we have a life that has what we would call a needless tragedy, or a tragedy that we feel in our definition may have happened too soon. And a lot of times that would come because somebody was young, or they were healthy. You know, anything you want to put on there that they were taken too soon, we look at that tragedy in space. So let's say we've got a family dynamic here, and all of a sudden a younger family member is taken away in a tragic way. So as we begin to look at that tragedy and try to make sense of that tragedy, we begin to have an estimation. So when this first happens, okay, when this first happens, then this person's piece in the puzzle is taken away, tragically removed and taken away. And of course then everybody else around is hyper aware of this tragedy, so this space begins to get filled with attention. So let's use orange as attention. So you start getting all these people paying attention to this tragedy. So immediately after the tragedy, you've got this space being filled with a large amount of attention. You've got people who are coming over to the house, spending time, agreeing with you that this was a loss that came too soon. Can't believe, why would God allow this to happen? And you get all this attention. So the attention immediately fills the space, the vacuum that was left by the initial disappearance of this person. So what happens then, as that attention fills the space, we are distracted and begin to focus on what was lost. So all this attention creates a hyper focus on what has been lost. Okay? And how do we define what has been lost? We define what has been lost by focusing on the past, okay? What this person was in the past, but we also define what has been lost by focusing on what this person could have been in the future. So we take all this attention that has filled this space, and we begin to glorify the past, and we glorify the future. We take and say how wonderful this person was, how wonderful this past was, and then we begin to talk about how much he or she could do in the future. And all this attention is filling this on what has been lost in the past and what will be lost in the future. And as we do that, that's fine, but what happens is that eventually the attention dissipates. Eventually, the attention disappears. Okay? And once the attention disappears, then that gap or that vacuum has to be filled for the people that are daily reminded of what's gone. So everybody else is going on with their lives, and everybody else is going on with their existence. Everybody's going on with other things, and they're no longer paying attention, and the vacuum's created. So what I believe we need to do in preparation for this vacuum is not bemoan, not grieve, not continue to measure. What we need to do, and I'm going to use this, what we need to begin to do is we need to begin to grow a memory. Okay, and I'm going to put a little plant here. Okay, now, and how are we going to grow a memory that's going to fill this space? We are going to grow a memory, and remember, growth comes from life. So if we're going to grow a memory that fills this space, we want it to be fruitful and multiply. So we're going to put fruit on this plant that's growing. All right, so what does this need to fill this space? Well, first you've got to have soil, fertile soil. You've got to have a proper seed. You've got to have sunlight. You've got to have water. And how are we going to provide this? We're going to provide this with no longer focusing on what has been lost. We are now going to celebrate what is. Okay? And how are we going to celebrate that? We're going to celebrate that with gratitude, and grace. Okay, I want you to listen to me very directly. This has happened. It's happened. There is nothing at all that can be done. It's happened. If I'm going to leave this space open, when the attention leaves, the grieving is going to turn into a root of bitterness. And when that root of bitterness takes life, that root of bitterness springs up, and that root of bitterness can infect every other person that is directly affected by this space. So if we continue to dwell on what has been lost, if we continue to define the past on what has been lost and define the future on what could have been, then that root of bitterness and anger and fear and upsetness and pain and doubt will begin to, that root of bitterness, and that fruit that root of bitterness is going to produce will affect everyone that is directly involved in this vacuum. So what have we got to do? We've got to fill this space with the seeds of what is. Now, let me ask you a question. What is? Well, what is we can continue to express gratitude for the time we had. When Jesus said, "I am," then that's all the confidence that he needed. I'm here. The fact that I'm here is all the confidence that I need, whether I'm supposed to be here. This person was here. Nothing's going to change that. That is. This person's existence is. Not was, not could have been. This person existed. That is a fact. So what am I going to do? I'm going to express gratitude every time I think of this person. I'm going to express gratitude for his isness, not his wasness. If every time I think of this person, it makes me grieve and sad and be bothered for what is lost, then I am defining this person's existence by death. Death is a cessation of life. Define the person by what is. This person existed. Express gratitude for what this person is. This person is your son. This person is your husband. This person is your father. This person is your wife, is your daughter, is your sister, is your child. Not was. No. Don't define this person's existence by death. Define this person's existence by life. This person existed. Secondly, define this person's existence by grace. Grace is an understanding that every good gift comes from God. The last thing I want is what I deserve. That's the last thing I want. Because if I get what I deserve, I'm not going to get much. Grace is what we have benefited in our life. So the fact is that this grace is sufficient for this situation, regardless of the circumstances, regardless of the embarrassment, regardless of the bad decisions. Whatever the circumstance is, grace is sufficient. So when I think of this person, I'm going to express gratitude. When I think of this person, I'm going to experience grace, and I'm going to realize this person is, not was. And then I'm going to allow those seeds of gratitude and grace to spring up and bring fruit that's going to benefit every person that has been affected by this vacuum. I'm going to fill the vacuum with gratitude and grace. I am not going to allow this vacuum, after the attention dissipates, to be a fertile ground for a root of bitterness. I am not going to grieve for what was or what could have been. I am going to celebrate what is. All right? Now, this would be easy for someone to say that had not lost anyone tragically. But I have. And I had a root of bitterness. And I allowed that anger. I allowed that grieving. And I allowed that passion for what should have been to eat away at me. And after the attention died down, I allowed that fruit to infect everybody around me. And then all of a sudden I realized that's not what God wants. God wants me to have enough faith and enough understanding to celebrate what is. This person existed and had life and was a gift and needs to be recognized as such. Hope this was helpful. I believe that this is biblical. If you don't believe in the Bible, I believe that psychologically, in a human aspect, even if you don't believe scripturally, that this would give you truth to understand that in the vacuum and in the space that's left by a tragic exit, make sure after the attention dies down that you plant in gratitude and grace, and that give that person's memory an isness, not a wasness. I hope that's helpful.